Oh, hi everyone. It's Rusty here again, and today I'm going to be talking about a topic that maybe we don't think about deeply enough, and that's hiking with our dogs. Now, as you may or may not know, I no longer have a dog. My sweet little dog Rosemary passed away about a year and a half before this recording, but you'll be seeing some of pictures from our better days with her. But here's our agenda for today. First of all, is hiking good for your dog? Secondly, is it good for you to be hiking with a dog? Is it respectful to other hikers? Does your dog like it, which should be one of your top concerns? And if you do go on the trail with your dog, how are you going to care for your dog on the trail? So the first issue is it good for the dog? I mean, that really ought to be your primary concern as a dog owner. Of course, you love your dog, and you should always have your dog's best interest in any activity that you put it through. So a question comes up, well, how far should a dog go in a day? And when we think about that, that's actually kind of a naive question. How far should a human go in a day? Well, it really depends on your conditioning. And a lot of times we don't stop to think that it's the same thing for your dog. Your dog can be conditioned to go quite a ways on a hike, but dogs are now domesticated animals. Your dog may very well be a dog bed potato, if not a couch potato. We never let our dogs on the couches, but some people do, and I don't criticize that. I'm just saying it's just the way we happen to raise our dogs. But she had her little doggy bed, and if she was a doggy bed potato, she would have trouble putting on a lot of miles. So the question of how far should your dog go actually depends on the dog's conditioning. So conditioning your dog is actually an important thing. Don't bring your dog out on a 7-day hike the first time she's ever seen the outdoors. Then the next question is, well, how far will your dog go in a day? Well, your dog will go, probably most dogs will go just about as far as you do, because the dog just wants to be with you. And you think about that. The dog is happy typically to be out in the woods and happy to be with you. The dog is going to do everything that he or she can do to keep up with you, even if it means going beyond what they're really capable of. I mean, when a dog gets to the point where it's actually refusing to move, that dog has probably gone well beyond what the dog maybe should have been subjected to. Another thing that happened with Rosemary, you see her in these pictures. When I brought her hiking with me, it was always me and Craig and Rosemary. And Craig and I sometimes hike at different speeds. And Rosemary was very concerned about the two of us, let's put it that way. And if we hiked 10 miles, she probably hiked 15, because she would run back and forth, constantly checking each of us to make sure that that we were, within touch, within reach, that she could keep track of both of us. Now, we did discover that at first we had to keep her on a leash, or she would run off chasing deers and stuff like that. But once we got like maybe 2 or 3 miles into a hike, that kind of got her into the mode where maybe she was a little too tired to run off, and she was really trying to stay with us. But it's a thing to keep in mind, that just because your dog goes 10 miles with you doesn't mean that that's how far your dog should have gone with you, or that's how far the dog was prepared to go with you. And I think I actually made that mistake a few times. So the next question is, well, is it good for you? Are you up to dealing with the special needs of hiking with a dog? You have to keep the dog under control, whether it's voice control or leash control. With Rosemary, it was started out as leash control, at least until she got over the excitement of running wild. And then voice control was enough after a couple miles. Though she did run off on us in the Green Mountains a couple times, and I thought I'd lost my dog in a national forest. And long stories there, but we always found her. And with the newer technology nowadays, we probably could have put some kind of tracker on her and taken care of that worry. But you don't want your dog running off. You don't want her getting into different things. So you need a well trained dog, and I'll get to that in a later slide. Well, if you're out on a long distance hike, can you stay at hostels? Some hostels won't allow dogs. Some I suppose do. I've never really checked to see which ones are dog friendly because I've never tried staying at a hostel with a dog. Can you resupply properly? Well, I know for sure. I would have had a lot of trouble on my trip down south, from Pennsylvania to Roanoke, Virginia. Uh, there are a lot of resupplies that I went through that I would not have been able to do if I had a dog with me. So that's just another concern. Are you going to be able to handle being with the dog? And then let's consider some places where dogs aren't allowed. I only know of the Appalachian Trail rules. There are national parks and probably state parks where a dog isn't allowed. Um, but on the Appalachian Trail, dogs are not allowed in the Smoky Mountains. Dogs are not allowed to walk through the Beartown State Zoo, the Beartown Zoo. Um, when Mike and I hiked through New York, we actually missed getting to walk through the zoo. It is an official part of the trail, and if you are hiking the trail, you're allowed to walk through the zoo. We got there about 10 minutes after closing, so we had to take the bypass trail, which is if you have a dog with you, you also have to take the bypass trail. And I'll tell you, that is not a nice trail. That is a nasty, broken glass, litter. It's just a mess. If you do go that way and you have to go around, I would actually suggest that you take out your phone, look at the roads, and find a way to take roads around the zoo to get to the bridge over the Hudson River. If you're coming the other way, find some other way to head in the other direction. And also, dogs are not allowed in Baxter State Forest in Maine. Baxter State Forest's primary purpose is actually as a wildlife sanctuary sort of thing, and not human recreation is actually secondary up there, even considering the Appalachian Trail. That's a whole nother story about respectful treatment of Mount Katahdin, and that maybe after I hike up there myself, maybe I'll do a video on that. Okay, so the next question is, well, what about others? Is it respectful to other hikers to have a dog with you? I love dogs, and when I see another hiker with a dog, I'm always willing to say hi to the dog and everything, but a lot of times these dogs are big and rambunctious, and it's one thing to say the dog is friendly, but is it too friendly? Is your dog good around strangers? And specifically, is it well behaved around strangers? Dogs can get dirty and messy, and a hiker doesn't want somebody else's dog jumping on them. Also, they can stink. They just like we do when we're out hiking. I mean, they've probably going through swamps and everything else because they typically don't stay on the trail that much. And the important part is when the dog has to answer the call of nature. I'll say, to be politely, does the dog know to get off the trail? Actually, I have to give Darlene fantastic credit because she raised Rosemary. And Rosemary would not poop on a lawn or on a road or on a dirt road even, or on a trail. She always got off trail. I mean, she would go 10, 15 feet at least off trail, which is actually important because sometimes we were hiking in the winter on cross-country ski trails, and the last thing a cross-country skier needs is dog dew on their skis. So she was well behaved in that manner, and she was shy around other people. So I didn't have so much of an issue with that with her, but I have run into people who have dogs that come right up to you, nice and friendly, and I don't personally have a problem with it, but a lot of hikers do. I was out hiking with my prior dog. I don't have any pictures of her. Her name was Tandy. She was my dog before we got Rosemary. She passed away a few years before we acquired Rosemary. And I did go hiking with her once, and she came across a stranger. She barked, and the guy froze. And she was a good dog that she was actually better than Rosemary was at coming to heel. So when I called her to me, she came right to me, and we were all right, and I put her on the leash. But not all other hikers can really deal with a dog. They may have allergies. They may have a legitimate fear of dogs. They may have been bitten in their lives. They just might not like dogs. So we have to be cognizant of other hikers as much as we are our own needs and our dog's needs. Now, having said that, you'll see in this picture on the left, you actually, if you squint, you can see Rosemary. She's kind of partially blocked by the railing on this shelter. And that shelter that night, it poured. And people who were actually on the front deck part, you can see the overhang there, they got drenched from water coming down and bouncing in on them. But we were okay. We were up on the normal sleeping part, and Rosemary was curled up at my feet. And the next morning when we got up, as dogs get up, even though she wasn't wet, she'll shake a little and her tags jingled a bit. And then the guy next to me looked over and said, "I didn't even know you had a dog with you." So, that I took that as a compliment about how well behaved and how quiet she was. Not all dogs are like that. She wasn't always like that. Sometimes she got locked in on something, a squirrel, a chipmunk, or whatever, and would just not hear me screaming at her and trying to get her to come back. So, but I was generally fortunate in having a well-behaved dog, and that's just, I'm not bragging. I'm just acknowledging that I was lucky, and not everybody is so lucky. So these are the things to consider is how is the dog being there going to impact the other hikers or the wildlife in the area. There are actually rules against allowing your dog to chase wildlife in most jurisdictions. So that means having very good control over the dog. We actually ended up with one of those lengthy, one of those retracting leashes, and it turned out when I got into areas where there were a lot of deer activity, we had to actually put that on her and keep her leashed during the whole hike. It was also very tough when we got to steep climbs. Fortunately, her pack had a handle on it where we could give her an assist and we could get her up those steep climbs. So there's a couple times we came across a ladder up against a rock wall in the woods, and it was very difficult to get her up that. So if you are going to go out on a trail with your dog, there's a number of things to be concerned about. First is water. Just like us, dogs need a lot of water, and we had kind of as a precursor to my current rehydration method, I kept a bottle for the dog, as you can see in the picture here, and I would have a cup that was just hers for drinking out of, and I had my watch set to beep every 20 minutes, and when the watch beeped, I would take the cup out and I would offer it to the dog. If she bonked it with her nose, she had learned that meant, no thanks, I'm good. But if she tried getting into that cup, that meant I had to get her some water. So I would pour the water in the cup, clean, filtered water, or else, from bottled water, to make sure that she remained hydrated. Another concern you do have with water is the dog's not going to wait for you. If she gets a little ahead of you and she comes to a stream, she's probably going to start drinking out of it before you can get a chance to say no, and give the dog some other water. So just be aware of that. You don't want the dog drinking out of streams any more than you should be drinking out of streams without filtering the water first. Secondly is food. Just like you burning a lot of extra calories, your dog is going to burn a lot of extra calories. And just like if you've ever had this experience where you've had a long day of hiking and you get into camp and you know you should eat, but you just don't feel like putting together the meal and you're just not hungry and you're going to pay for that the next day. Well, I think the same thing happens with the dog, because quite often we would have plenty of food there for her and she just wouldn't eat it. Finally, we did find these foil packets of moist food. She wasn't generally a moist food eater, but that was a special treat on the trail and that would attract her, and that's the way we made sure that she got enough calories into her. Warmth. Now, Rosemary was a big, fluffy, furry dog, but if you have a short-haired dog, you have to provide for the dog's warmth. We would let her. She would sleep in the tent with us. That was the only safe way. I couldn't let her be outside, chained up or tied up or anything overnight. She slept with us, and she liked curling up, and she liked being wrapped in a blanket, just like you're in your sleeping bag. She had a doggy backpack. She kind of didn't like the idea of the doggy backpack, but we kind of made her carry her fair share, which was basically, her food, not her water, because it was too inconvenient for us to take the water out of the pack. I carried her water and I traded off something. She carried something else for us, just to even it out, because we didn't want her to be a loafer and get a free ride out of us. But it's actually a decision. Are you going to have the dog carry her own stuff, or are you going to carry it for her? Just something to consider. And then finally, there is conditioning. I alluded to that earlier. It's important that your dog is in condition to go whatever distance you're going to go. So, regardless of whatever else goes into your decision, don't bring the dog out without training hikes. Day hikes first, perhaps. A lot of these pictures that I've shown in this presentation were actually from day hikes. And then maybe a one overnighter. We have brought her on some very long hikes, 7 days. Craig and I brought her up through Vermont for up to 7 days, and I'm going to, in a moment, go over how that worked out. So, Rosemary's last hike in Vermont, and I don't mean that to sound ominous, it was several years before she passed on. But here's some pictures from it. You can see that this is kind of an exhausted dog. And we realized that these multi-day hikes, she liked being there with us, but she didn't really enjoy the hiking as much as we thought. I mean, she liked being with us, running back and forth, but like Craig pointed out to me just the other day, at one point we took the pack off her, and all of a sudden she perked up. So she didn't like having the pack, for one thing. But I could tell our last hike, when Darlene happened to come to pick us up at the trailhead in Vermont, when she pulled up the van, I remember saying to some other hikers there, I said, watch this, the dog is just going to be so excited to see my wife. And Darlene pushed the button in the back door, the van opened. And Rosemary really could have cared less about seeing Darlene. She saw that van and she loved the idea that she knew that moved on its own. The trip was over. She jumped up on the back seat where she normally was, and she curled up and fell asleep almost immediately. Later that evening, we were back at home, and I put her backpack through the washing machine, and when I took it out of the dryer, and I called to her and I showed her, I said, hey, remember this? She ran out of the room and hid under the dining room table. That was her way of telling me, Dad, I don't want to do that anymore. So, with that in mind, my final thoughts are this. I mean, I can't decide for you whether you bring your dog on a hike or not. That's entirely up to you. But I hope you'll consider the needs of the dog, the what's best for the dog, whether the dog enjoys it or not. My rule now is I don't know if we'll ever get another dog, though we probably will. I hate to say one more dog in our lifetime, but that's where we are in life. We probably will get another dog after the loss of Rosemary and the loss of Twinkie, our cat. After we're kind of done with that and we're ready for another pet, we probably will get another dog. And I think the rule that I'm going to apply here is I'm going to train the dog for hiking with long walks and day hikes, but I will never bring the dog out for more than a single night. So if I'm going to do a 20-mile loop, say a 10-mile hike out to some place like up to that shelter that I showed you a few slides ago, and then maybe the side trail back down, one night out is probably enough for the dog. I won't ever subject the dog again to multiple nights out there. Now, there was one story that I meant to tell earlier, I forgot to tell. I was actually out in the 100-mile wilderness. Now, I say I've never done the 100-mile wilderness. Well, I have made a brief foray into it with my friend Mike, but we had to turn back because of equipment failures and weather problems. So I consider myself never to have been there, but I was. And I saw a southbound hiker going through the 100-mile wilderness. She was almost done. And there was a little bitty dog, one of those dogs smaller than a cat, just scurrying along trying to keep up with her. It was clearly her dog. Now, maybe she carried it most of the time and this was a flat part of the trail and maybe she put it down. But if she was actually making this dog hike long distance with her, that dog was just not capable of doing that sort of hike. So that's going to be my rule. Even if I have a dog that likes hiking, just all things considered, respect for the other hikers, respect for the wildlife, I'm going to limit it to, an occasional overnighter with the dog, and leave the dog home for my longer hikes. So that's it, everybody. Thanks for listening.